We hear it all the time. A richer country is a better country. But is that really true? Today, we're going to dig into the huge difference between a nation just making more money and a nation where people's lives are actually getting better. It all comes down to two big ideas: economic growth versus economic development. So let's just tackle the big question head on. Is a country with more money always a better place to live? I mean, you'd think the answer would be a simple yes, right? But as we're about to find out, it's a lot more complicated than that. And really, all that complexity, it boils down to these two concepts. On one hand, you've got economic growth. That's all about the money, plain and simple. How big is the country's economic pie? But on the other hand, you have economic development, which asks a much deeper question. What about people's well-being? All right, so first things first. Before we can really get into the journey of how a nation prospers, we need to be super clear about the destination. We have to know exactly what we mean by growth and development. Okay, so economic growth. This one is the more straightforward of the two. It's really just a numbers game. Is the country's economic pie getting bigger? That's it. We measure this with something called real GDP. And that little word real is super important. It just means we've taken inflation out of the equation, so we're talking about actual tangible growth, not just prices going up. Now, economic development, this is where things get really interesting. See, development isn't just about a bigger economic pie. It's about a better one, and making sure everyone actually gets a decent slice. It starts with growth, sure, but it also demands real-world improvements in people's lives, like better schools, better hospitals, a cleaner planet, and institutions you can actually trust. And this brings us to what is maybe the single most important rule in this whole conversation. Growth is necessary for development. You absolutely need that bigger pie to pay for better healthcare and education. But, and this is the part people forget, growth by itself is not enough. You can have a country that's getting richer and richer while its people aren't getting any better off. Okay, so we've got our definitions down. Now let's talk about the real world, because for a lot of developing nations, that road to true development is full of massive potholes and roadblocks. It's a tough journey. And a lot of these roadblocks are all connected. It's kind of like a vicious cycle. You see low standards of living, which are often tied to low productivity from the workforce. Why? Well, a lot of the time, it's because the whole economy is built on just exporting raw materials, which leaves the country in a really fragile position when dealing with other nations. Let's see what that actually looks like with some data. I mean, just look at this. When we say low standards of living, this is what we're talking about. An average life expectancy of only 57 years in developing nations compared to 74 in developed ones. That's a 17-year gap. Let that sink in for a second. 17 years. And the picture gets even clearer and honestly even sadder when you look at this. The rate of infant mortality is more than 6 times higher. These aren't just numbers on a chart. They represent huge, everyday challenges in basic healthcare, clean water, and nutrition. So what about that economic vulnerability we mentioned? Well, here it is. For so many of these countries, a massive chunk of their income, we're talking up to 80%, comes from exporting primary goods. Think coffee beans or oil or copper. The problem is, the prices for those things go up and down like a roller coaster on the world market. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation that's constantly shaking. So with all these massive challenges, how does a country even get its growth engine started? Well, economists usually point to 4 key ingredients that you absolutely have to have. Think of it like a recipe. First, you need human resources. That means your people, their skills, their education. Second, natural resources, your land, your minerals, and so on. Third, you've got capital formation. That's just a fancy way of saying all the physical stuff you need. The factories, the roads, the computers. And finally, the magic ingredient, technology. This is the great multiplier, finding new and better ways to do everything. But, just having all the ingredients in the kitchen doesn't guarantee a great meal. You need a recipe. Or, in this case, you need a map. That's why so many countries create something called a development plan to guide the way. So a development plan is basically the country's official game plan. It's a document that says, okay, for the next 5 years, here are our goals, here are our priorities, and here is how we're going to spend our money to get there. It's a roadmap. So why even bother with a big formal plan? Well, there are some pretty big reasons. You want to make sure you're using your limited resources in the smartest way possible. You need to step in when the market isn't working right. And, critically, a good plan shows the rest of the world, especially investors, that you're serious and you've got your act together. Of course, anyone who's ever made a plan knows that's the easy part. Following it, that's a whole other ballgame. In the real world, planning is incredibly tough. You might not have good data to start with. The political situation could change overnight. You might not have enough skilled people to actually do the work. And sometimes that foreign aid you were counting on just never arrives. And here's the thing. That roadmap we've been talking about, it's constantly being redrawn. The challenges of the 21st century are changing the game completely. So for our last section, let's look at the new ideas in economics that are reshaping this whole journey. To deal with these new challenges, the field of economics itself has had to level up. Now we've got things like climate economics to figure out the cost of a warming planet. The rise of companies like Uber and Airbnb gave us platform economics. To fight waste, we have the circular economy. And with amazing new tools like AI, behavioral economics is digging into the weird reasons we make the financial choices we do. Let's just zoom in on that circular economy idea for a second. For pretty much all of human history, our economy has worked in a straight line. We take stuff from the earth, we make things out of it, and then we just throw it away. The whole goal of a circular economy is to bend that line into a circle. It's about designing a system from the very beginning where there is no away. There is no waste. Old products become the raw materials for new ones. And this isn't just a small tweak. It is a complete rethinking of how we do, well, everything. And it's a similar story with climate economics. It forces every country to play both offense and defense at the same time. Mitigation is our offense. That's cutting emissions to stop the problem from getting worse. But adaptation is our defense. That's learning how to live with the climate changes we can no longer prevent. Every single development plan from now on has to do both. Which brings us right back to where we started. In a world that's changing this fast, facing challenges this big, we really have to ask ourselves that question again. Is just getting richer the point? Or is the real goal of our economic journey something bigger, something more like building a future that's sustainable, fair, and strong enough for whatever comes next? What do you think?